I think that the people who have found the storm, the people who read the storm, I think that they think it's something different and it's something that they want to be a part of. I hope that they think that it's honest, and I hope that they think it's original, and I hope that they think that I'm doing something that they can't find in other places.
Welcome to the storm.
I'm your host, Stuart Winchester. Storm Skiing Podcast, episode number 200. Can you believe it? I can't believe it, and I've been here the entire time. We're going to mix it up today to celebrate, but honestly, I can't even take credit for the idea. A while back, I think actually almost a year ago, Entebeni Systems and IndyPass owner Eric Mogensen pitched me on an idea. He would join me on my podcast as guest number 199, his first ever ski pod, by the way, if I would agree to let him flip it around and interview me for episode 200. So I said, why not? And here we are. First, I want to acknowledge that this podcast took a huge step forward before episode 200 as we went out with our first video podcast for episode 198 with Mammoth Mountain COO Eric Clark. That means you can now watch the Storm Skiing Podcast at stormskiing.com or on YouTube at Storm Ski Journal. Please give me a follow over there. You can also follow me around on Instagram and X at Storm Ski Journal. And if you want your own way to rep the storm as we blow past this latest milestone and head into what I think will be an awesome next 200 episodes of the storm, you can set yourself up with some storm merch at the new Storm Store, which you can find at stormskiing.myshopify.com, where you can pick up a hat, a hoodie, a shirt, a sticker, and a bunch of other stuff. But, of course, the very best way to support the Storm's mission of independent ski journalism will always be by upgrading to the paid tier of the Storm Skiing Journal and Podcast, which gets you access to 100% of the Storm's written content, past and present, which hits your inbox year-round. And we have a limited time bonus on offer. Right now, when you upgrade to the paid version of the Storm Skiing Journal and Podcast, you will also get a free year of Slopes Premium. That is a $29.99 value, absolutely free. If you are not familiar with Slopes, it is an incredible ski tracking app. I've been using it for years, and I love how it compiles my stats by day, by trip, by season, by my entire life of using the app. Also very cool features like real-time tracking of your friends while you're on the bump, and at many resorts, one-touch contact with Ski Patrol. If you want to try Slopes, you can claim a free premium day pass by clicking on the link in the article that accompanies this podcast on stormskiing.com. All right, let's get into it. Episode 200 of the Storm Skiing Podcast, an interview with me, Stuart Winchester, editor and host of the Storm Skiing Journal and Podcast.
So I came to you with an idea. You've been trying to get me to do a podcast for a little while, and I've always been super against doing a podcast, not specifically with you, but just in general. And I said, okay, it was probably a year ago, maybe 2 years ago almost.
I want to say that we had the conversation at Copper when we were skiing at Copper in January of 24.
January of 24. Yep, that was it. So we were at Copper, and I said, well, I'll do number 199 and you do 200. And that seemed like a long way away, like forever away. And that's kind of why I said it was like, I should have said I'll do 999 and you can do 1000. But here we are at 200. And it is a pretty remarkable thing to have 200 podcasts, especially in the short amount of time that you've done it. So I'm going to kind of use the number of the podcast as a bit of a framework. So let's go all the way back to one then, right? Tell me about what was the first podcast and why.
So I started this in 2019 and it launched in October of 2019. But I worked on the idea for 6 months before I published anything. I started by making a list of all the different people that I wanted to talk to. And I started specifically with the Northeast. And I chose the Northeast because I live here. And it's a region with a lot of ski areas. There's 100 ski areas in New England, and there's 50 in New York, and there's another 30 in PA. And so there was a lot I could get to in a day. and have firsthand knowledge of. Now, I'd grown up in the Midwest and I'd skied out west a lot, so I knew those areas, but I wanted to deal with something manageable. And so I made this list and I was making the list, and at one point I just stopped and I was like, this is stupid. I've never worked in skiing. I don't know a single person who works in skiing. I don't know any of these people. No one knows who I am. I don't know how to get a hold of them. No one is going to talk to me. Like, this is idiotic. What am I doing? And I almost quit. And then I was like, why not? Let's just see what happens. So reached out to a bunch of people, heard back from a few. The first person who ever said, yes, I'll do an interview with you is John Schaefer, owner of Berkshire East in Catamount. He was not, however, the first one that I ever recorded. That was Jeremy Davis, the founder of the excellent New England Lost Ski Areas project. But that was not the first one I released. No offense to Jeremy, because he was actually an awesome interview and his subject matter is fascinating. But I wanted to get some attention, especially because I was completely unknown. And there were two people who said yes that had no business saying yes. Like, there was no reason for them to get involved with a podcast that had no released episodes with someone they never even spoken to. And one was Mike Salamano, president and GM of Killington, obviously a big deal out here, biggest skier in the East. And the other was Stephen Kircher, CEO of Boyne Resorts. And with Stephen, I think I appealed to him as a guy who was from Michigan, and I had this story about learning how to ski moguls at Boyne Mountain and how I really loved it and really value his perspective. But we didn't make that one happen for a little while. I recorded Mike and I released him as episode number 1 on October 13th, 2019. And that was a very deliberate decision to say, okay, if I can actually put this out on, for example, Facebook enthusiast groups, then no one's going to pay attention to me, but they will pay attention to Killington and the guy who runs Killington, and they will want to know what he has to say. And that should lead to subscribers. Not to make it sound too transactional, but that was the bald equation going on in my head. And Mike gave a great interview and was very gracious.
So back to Jeremy Davis. Interesting. I'm going to meet Jeremy for the first time on Friday. He's going to come up here to Black and Ski. But that was probably the most visited website of my youth, was the New England Lost Ski Area project. And I remember it was like black, and it was, very like 2004, 2002, and really incredible what somebody like that has done for skiing and documenting what's happened. And I think you're doing something very similar to that. And I think we talk about why it's important, but how does a guy that lives in New York City, who, like you said, doesn't know anything about skiing, why do you do this? Tell me about before episode 1.
Yeah, so to clarify, I knew a lot about skiing. I didn't know anything about running a ski area or about the ski business. I'd been a skier since I was a teenager. Did not grow up in a ski family, but ended up picking up with it through a friend and was very into it. And it inspired in me this reaction that wasn't like anything else I'd ever done. So I had this branch off in my life, right? When I was done with school, I said, all right. Well, actually, when I was done with high school, I was like, Mom, I'm going to move to Colorado and be a skier. And she's like, no, you're going to college. So that's how I ended up in college. I didn't want to go, ended up going because my mom made me. And
where'd you go to school and for what?
Well, I started actually community college, a little place called Delta College in near Saginaw, Michigan. Then I transferred after a couple years to University of Michigan, decided I wanted to do English. Once I graduated from Michigan, I was going to either go west or I was going to go to a city. And I had a girlfriend at the time who wanted to be an actress, and she was really into New York. I didn't know anything about New York. I didn't understand what it was. Like, I knew about it, of course, but I didn't get that it was this aspirational place that people wanted to be. And we drove here from Michigan for a weekend, and we parked up on Broadway up in the hundreds on the west side, and we just walked all the way down to Times Square. And in that walk, it was around midnight. It was a warm spring day. And in the course of that 80 blocks, I was like, I could spend my life here because I love the immediacy of life here. I loved how when we went by the grocery stores, they had the semis out in the street and they were unloading them. There wasn't loading docks and things weren't hidden in the back. It was just life was very much right there. So I ended up in the city and that was 2002. So I never moved to the mountains. And this is a very roundabout way to get back to your question, but I always loved skiing. I never let go of it. I always was skiing as much as I could. They have these buses that go up from the city. They leave at 3:30 in the morning. You go up to Stratton and back in a day, or Okemo or Mount Snow. And I would do that quite a bit, even when I didn't have a car in the city for a few years. And it was something that I always wanted more of. And it was the one big regret of living in the city is that I couldn't ski as much as I wanted. But eventually, I figured out it's actually a really great place to be a skier, especially when you stop obsessing over biggest, baddest, best, tallest, snowiest. There's so much you can get to from New York. There's 200 ski areas within a 6-hour drive. You can get almost anywhere on a plane from New York City pretty instantly. We have 3 airports, direct flights to Jackson and Bozeman and all kinds of places. So it's a little bit weird. I acknowledge that someone who is centering their life around skiing lives in a place where there isn't any skiing. But I do think that it gives me the advantage of not being a homer, uh, not being too close to any one issue, and being able to get anywhere. And I get out west about once a month, and as you know, I travel all around the Northeast all the time. So I've come to think of it as a logical place to do this from.
Okay. Well, I think there's really interesting logic there, right? I think, yeah, New York is the center of the world for a lot of things. But, and apparently the Storm Skiing Journal as well. And I think that is interesting. So I want to come back to that thing about being an outsider because I do find you to be a disruptor in the industry and those type of things. And everyone loves to throw around the word of what a disruptor is, but for me, I always come back to what are you disrupting, right? And what do you think is different than what you do with ski journalism? And I use the word journalism, with purpose versus anyone else.
So I'll go back to the reason why I started this, and I started the Storm because I wanted to read the Storm, and I started the Storm Skiing Podcast because I wanted to listen to the Storm Skiing Podcast. When I got to a point in my life where I could start driving a little bit more, and really that point came when I moved from Manhattan to Brooklyn, and it was just easy to have a car. And I would take these 4-hour drives or 5-hour drives one way up to Stratton or Killington or wherever. And I was like, wow, I really want to listen to some ski content right now. And this was around, 2017, 18. But all of the ski podcast stuff I could find was just bros talking to bros about broing out and jumping off things and weed and being crazy. I just it was nothing relatable. It was nothing I cared about. These weren't people who had opinions that I really wanted to hear in particular, or were doing anything particularly interesting other than being good at skiing, which is cool. I mean, I like skiing and I want to be good at it too, but there's only so much I can listen to people talk about nothing to each other. So I was like, okay, what I want to hear about are ski areas and ski resorts, because that's where I spend all my time. I have no interest in the backcountry, especially after breaking my leg a couple years ago and getting sled evac'd off of Black Mountain in Maine. If that would have happened in the middle of the woods, I would have lost my leg or my mind or both. So I just like ski areas. There's enough variety there that I never feel like I need to go outside of them. And no one was really talking about them anymore. So that wasn't just podcasts. I grew up, I came of age, I guess, in the 90s. And there were a lot of really good ski magazines in the 90s. That might have been a golden age of ski magazines. There was Powder and Ski and Skiing and Snow Country, and I have them all lined up here. I kept every issue. That is my encyclopedia of skiing. This is how I learned about skiing. This is how I knew about Alta and Snowbird as a kid who lived in a town of 800 people in Michigan. and that was the place that I had to get to at some point. And it was how I knew about Tahoe and the whole scene there, and all the different ski areas. And that foundational knowledge, that encyclopedia for the next generation of skiers just wasn't there. There was no one who was making it. All the ski journalism had gone to Stoke journalism, and it was hype, and it was, even when it wasn't bros jumping off things, it was very, most of what I could find was very transparently what's called pay to play, meaning you're essentially writing an article in exchange for access to something. It's a lot of puffery, and it's a glorified advertisement, and that's not journalism. And I had no interest in reading that. It's because I like to read things.
I think the PC term now is sponsored content.
Yeah.
Yeah, sponsored content.
So that wasn't being done, and the gap, the vacuum was filled by social media. And social media is cool in some ways. It's a great way to find communities of like-minded people. And for skiing, that's neat because when I was growing up and I was a teenager and I had friends, they sort of ski, but they weren't as into it as me. And it would have been cool to have that group of people. So you can find your people on the internet. The issue was they weren't working with good information because there was no good information. It was a rumor mill multiplied by the thousands, spread around the world in these ski enthusiast groups. And it was very easy for bad information to get out there. And it's like, here's an opportunity. I can write about lift served skiing, which is the thing I love. And I can do it because I ended up once I moved to New York, I went to grad school for journalism. So I had that background, but I kind of got into corporate writing, which it paid the bills, but it wasn't very gratifying work from a soul point of view. So this was my chance to get back into journalism and to really do something with that degree and to actively work in it and to ask the people running the resorts why things weren't happening, right? Slidebrook Express is not running at Sugarbush. Well, we can talk about it and complain about it for 500 comments on Facebook. Or I can just ask John Hammond, the general manager who's been there for 35 years, hey, why isn't Slidebrook Express on yet? I interrupt this podcast to ask you a question. Does your marketing need fresh perspective from industry experts? Do you need better storytelling or rebranding or advertising? If so, then I want to tell you about my friends at Bonfire Collective. They are a fractional marketing team that collaborates with ski areas and other outdoor brands. So what exactly does that mean to be a, quote, fractional marketing team that collaborates with ski areas and outdoor brands, end quote? Well, what that means is that Bonfire can help you rethink your approach in ways that can turbocharge your business. For example, Bonfire Collective took on the marketing at one New Hampshire ski area and doubled revenue in just 3 years. And last year, when the Storm was ready to invest in its first ever digital marketing campaign, we worked with Bonfire Collective to make it happen. They could not have made it easier or been more effective, and I could not be happier with the results. I love working with them, and I think you will too. To get started, you'll want to talk to Eric at Bonfire Collective. Eric is not only the founder of Bonfire, but he was a co-founder of Bluebird Backcountry, the first human-powered ski area, so he has been around the ski business. Visit bonfirecollective.com to get started, or I will be happy to make that connection for you. Back to it.
Let's dive into the journalism piece a little bit. So you go to grad school for journalism. Where?
I went to Columbia.
So you went to Columbia, and you walk out of Columbia, you're really good. You want to be a journalist? Like, what's the deal? You graduate. What do you want to do? And what do you do?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I scarred myself a little bit when I was in my 20s by getting into a lot of debt. And I hated having debt, and I still hate having debt. And it was a mix of credit card debt and student loans. And so what I did and this was pre-journalism school, is I was waiting tables. I got a job as a teacher through this program called New York City Teaching Fellows. So as a teacher in the city, I kept my job waiting tables, and I worked 2 jobs for 3 years to pay off all that debt. So I went from, it seemed like a lot of money at the time, like 60 grand in debt, to zero. And the best day of my life was the day that I paid off that debt. So when I got into Columbia, I was like, Jesus Christ, this is $1,200 a credit hour. And I was like, I'm not going back. I'm not going back in debt. It's like if you finally get out of prison, like you're not that I've ever been to prison, but I'd imagine you don't want to go back. So, or if you get out of the hospital, you just don't want to go back. So I was like, all right, I'm going to keep both jobs. I'm going to go to grad school. I'm going to pay this off in cash. And I am not going to go back into debt no matter what. So I paid it all in cash as I went. So I graduated, I had no debt. Along the way, about halfway through Columbia, this opportunity came up to write for the NBA. The National Basketball Association's global office is here in New York City. And I was working as a teacher. I hated it. I was the most worst suited person ever to be a teacher. I can't believe I did it for 4 years. I think it was just a survival instinct that got me through it. I don't have the personality for it. I don't have the patience for it. So I desperately wanted out. And I got the job at the NBA. And it didn't pay a lot, but it paid a lot more than teaching. And it also paid a lot more than any journalism job that potentially would have come along. And it was a neat job at first. It was great because, well, let's start with the fact that there weren't cockroaches in the refrigerator like there were at my school. And I go and open it, and the fridge is filled with dead roaches. And I'm like, well, I'm not putting my lunch in there. And you would go to the NBA, and it's clean, and it's the sterile environment, and it's very civilized, and there's no kids yelling in the halls, and it's very quiet. And I would do things like I was the speechwriter for the WNBA president for 5 years. I would write, ghostwrite for the commissioner, and he was called the associate commissioner, vice commissioner. I don't know. Now he's the commissioner, Adam Silver. He was commissioner at the time, David Stern. And I would do a lot of letter writing and op-ed writing, and I ran their intranet, and I would do things like that, which was fine. It was easy. The benefits were good. The pay was fine. I could live in Manhattan on it. And that was in 2007. I couldn't find a pathway to journalism then. Then 2008, my daughter was born. 2009, I got divorced. So all of a sudden I'm living in Manhattan, paying child support, paying, half my income went to rent. Most of the rest of it went to child support. I think I had about $400 a month to buy groceries and pay my bills. Luckily, I had no debt. But it was just kind of a situation where I got backed into this corporate world, and I couldn't really leave it. And I couldn't really find a way out to do journalism. And I didn't really understand the freelance world. And I wrote a lot on my own. I would write a lot of fiction. None of it really ever went anywhere, but I spent a lot of time doing it. And then I found out about Substack in 2019, just randomly reading the New York Times, and that everything kind of changed from there.
So your journalism school, come out of that, you drop into the corporate world. You hang out at the corporate world for over 10 years then?
Yeah, 2007 to 2012 at the NBA. I went to AIG for a year. That was a really bad fit. Went to Viacom in 2014, and that was a great company to work for. And I worked there for 10 years up until last year when I left to do the Storm full time.
Okay, so somewhere around episode 140, 125, whatever the number is, you decide to take this hobby and turn it into your livelihood. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really fun to start something, but it's really hard for that thing to move from being a fun, cool idea to this is how I put groceries on my table, right? Mm-hmm. Especially from someone that's been through, debt and doesn't want those things and worked 4 jobs or, became a teacher and really didn't like it, but really just needed to get through it, right? So you're rolling the dice again, and you're rolling the dice, in your 40s, not in your 20s. And how do you decide to do that? How do you decide to roll them?
very slowly, very incrementally, very carefully. So it wasn't a situation where I sat my wife down and said, sweetheart, uh, I'm going to leave my corporate job where I get insurance and 6 weeks of vacation and a bonus every year, and I'm going to start a ski newsletter and it's going to be great. I didn't do that. So I'm much more conservative than that in the way that I move and make sure that the business of my life is tended to. So I started the Storm while I had this job in 2019. I didn't know if it would ever become a revenue generating part of my life, but I started it with the knowing that it could, because we've come a long way from the days of a guy blogging in his kitchen and trying to figure out how to get people to read your blog, right? Like an Andrew Sullivan type, and he was able to break through, but most people can't. And it's a lot of work and it's exhausting. And after a while, you just give up. I read this article on the subway about Substack. And Substack is this really amazing thing for writers and creators because it's a platform, I guess like a social media platform, that takes care of all the tech and has a team of geniuses developing all this stuff that I could never do in 1,000 years, like aggregating your subscriber list and making sure that every time you hit send on an email, it goes to all the subscribers, and making sure the integrity of the website is whole, and making sure that the CMS, the content management system, is working. And the best thing they do, though, is have all the programming or whatever, I don't know how things work, in place so that I can add a paywall. And I could have done that at any time. It's all built into Substack. But I knew that I had to build an audience first. And I knew that in order to ask people to pay for something, I had to give them something that they felt was worth paying for. And it had to be something they couldn't get elsewhere, which, like I said, I found that niche. Talk to people who run ski areas. No one else was doing that. Okay. Establish that yourself as the person who does that, and you've created something unique. But it took a while. It took about 2 years. And I built an audience, and I said, once I get to a certain subscriber number, that's when I'm going to turn on paid. And it just so happened, and that number was 5,000. And it just so happened that the week I hit 5,000, I broke my leg. And I couldn't do anything for 4 months but sit there. It's like, you know what? I hit 5,000. I have a good audience. My open rate is super good because Substack gives you stats to let you see where you sit among other writers just on average. So, okay, I think I have an engaged audience. I'll turn on the paywall. And I did it, and I was super nervous. And I sent out an email saying I'm activating a paywall, and then I just left. I didn't look at my computer for the rest of the day because I couldn't, what if no one signed up? And there was actually a really good response to it, and a couple hundred people signed up in the first day. And by the end of my first couple weeks, I had about 500 or 600 paid. And that number just continued to grow from there, and my free number continued to grow. And the great part about this business model is that when I set up a paywall, because I'm producing a fixed product, every additional person that pays for it makes it a more sustainable model. This isn't a muffin business where if I want to sell one muffin, I make one muffin. And if I want to sell 100 muffins, I make 100 muffins. If I want 100 paid subscribers, I just need one good piece of content. By 2024, it had built up into a kind of nice little business. And I was like, all right, I mean, this is nice extra, but what could I do with this if I just stepped into it full time? I think I could really grow it.
So let's talk about the paid piece, right? What are people paying for when they subscribe to the Storm? Like what are they? I'm not necessarily saying like a guaranteed number of podcasts or those type of things, but like what do you get?
Yeah. I wrote a post about this today, and 2024 was not my best year in the Storm, I don't think. I had some health problems at the beginning of the year, which are well documented on the podcast. I had to get a stent, which was weird for someone my age and of my profile. And that really messed me up in the head. And so my productivity wasn't great. And I think I still did some good things and did some good podcasts and did some good stories. But when I went onto Substack and looked at my subscriber retention rates, they're at 90% year over year, which I'm told is a good number by Substack for a paid product. I don't know exactly how it compares, but I know it's above average for a writer. And I had to ask myself, I'm like, why would people continue to subscribe even if I'm not putting out as many articles as I did in 2023, or putting them out as frequently or necessarily as consistently? And I kind of had this, people write to me all the time in response to the emails, or they just have my information. And the sense I get from them is less that they're customers than that they're almost, I want to be careful how I use this word, but fans. And I don't think they're like fanboys, and I don't think they're rooting me on like you would expect your parents to do or something. But what I mean by that is I think they're enthusiastic about the product in the same way that someone might be about like the Kansas City Chiefs or the New York Yankees or whatever team is your team, where they're with me and they're following me and they like the spirit of what I'm doing and see my success as their success in a way. So when you have a team, you don't abandon them when they have a bad year. You stay with them and you know they're going to have better years. And you always hold out that hope that you're going to be part of something special. And I think that the people who have found the storm, the people who read the storm, I think that they think it's something different and it's something that they want to be a part of. Because, and I don't know exactly why, but if I were to say why I hope it is I hope that they think that it's honest, and I hope that they think it's original, and I hope that they think that I'm doing something that they can't find in other places. That's what I think you're getting when you subscribe to the storm, is you're part of an attempt to return to a form of ski journalism that is honest, that is focused on the things that most skiers actually experience, and that is not deferential to the ski industry or skiing, and is going to bring you an objective perspective with some opinion on the modern state of lift surf skiing in America.
Yeah, and I think from certainly my perspective, when I read it, like I'm thankful that somebody talks about the things that you talk about, and I think most of your readers are ultimately thankful, and I think the operators that you interview are thankful, and there's an attention to something. Like for me, it's I look at things like Ski Area Magazine, which is 100% industry focused, chairlift parts, those type of things, and then I look at like Ski Magazine. And it's generally more focused on that aspirational destination, coolest thing ever, shred, bro kind of thing, right? And when you take that operational piece and you take that aspirational piece and you mix them together, to me, that's kind of what the storm is in a little ways, is that it is a very interesting hybrid. And it is written by a guy in New York City, right? And it is written by a guy that his last job was, a corporate PR person. And I think there's a lot of hybrids and there's a lot of gray in there. There's a lot of things that have been mixed, but that's ultimately why it's successful. And I think people are thankful. But you've got two very like distinct people that you have to keep happy and thankful. And one are the resort operators and the people that you interview on your podcasts, and then the other one is obviously all the people that read it. And how do you balance that? Because that's really hard, especially for me. Like that personally, I think that's really hard, and I'm always amazed as to how I can only imagine the conversations that you're having across skiing on a daily basis, and you're being told something that's happening here, or you're getting different stories, but yet I find you to be uniquely positive as a human, right? And forward looking as a human, but you still also have to be very authentic in what you report and how you report it. And in an industry where, there's a lot of big personalities, and I love the way that you put it, right? Is that skiing's not a team sport. And so we have a lot of people in skiing that aren't very good at team sports. And so you have egos, you have personalities. How do you mix them? How do you get them to continue to talk to you while still being authentic to the readership?
So skiing is a little different than a lot of industries that are maybe more accustomed to having a critical press, right? And when I worked at the NBA, there was this large coterie of journalists who were focused on not so much covering the games and the box scores and your beat writer kind of thing, but they were analyzing what was happening with the league. And they were breaking down like LeBron James made his decision and what did that mean? And the NBA All-Star game was supposed to be in Atlanta and they pulled it out for some political reason. And what does this mean? And when I went to Paramount Viacom, there was that same industry press that would look at every move that we would do and what did our CEO do and what we're going to do about streaming, et cetera. And skiing hasn't really had that before, at least not recently, at least not in a at scale or in any kind of prominent way. So I didn't know how they would react to it, right? Especially since I was coming at this as an outsider. And I found that as long as I am honest, and as long as I approach this from a place of seeking out the truth, and as long as I give those sides, those operators, an opportunity to respond, they're okay with the criticism. They can take it. The operators in general in the ski industry have proven to have thicker skins than I thought they would. Who does not have a thick skin are the skiers. Because skiers, in many cases, especially your 100 days a year at Jackson, Alta guy, they see that ski area as part of their identity. It is an extension of them. And when you say anything about that ski area, they take it as a hit on them. Let's take Jackson Hole as an example, right? So Jackson Hole is independent. Everyone is worried that Vail RSR is going to buy it. Well, the owners sell it and they end up selling in 2023 to a group of local investors. Now, super rich people, but it's still independent, right? So my inclination is let's do a story. Let's talk to people because Jackson is like this place that hates the Icon Pass and they're super independent. So if I want to talk to Mary Kay Buckley, the CEO at the time of Jackson Hole, I can do that. But when I try to talk to the skiers and get their point of view, no one wants to be on the record. So that's where the dynamic has been a little bit challenged. Like the skier like me, who's out random place A in America, and here's my target audience as I see it, is the person who skis 15, 20 or more days a year at a variety of places because they have an Indy Pass and an Icon Pass, and they want to go exploring, and maybe they have a season pass at their local mountain, right? Maybe they live around the corner from Song Mountain and they have a pass there, but they have the Icon, so they like to travel, and they have the Indy because they want to see all these different places in New England. So they tend to really like the Storm because of that perspective. And the operators, and I didn't foresee this as an audience, but it is a big part of my audience, they like it because they see what other operators are doing. And I think one reason they're willing to give me their unfiltered perspective, even if I'm critical of their operation, is because they value hearing that from other people through the Storm. And I always give them a chance, the operators a chance to reply to the criticism I have. So that's kept them happy. That outlier group, that ultra local, the group that wants to tar and feather me because I like the idea of the Little Cottonwood Gondola, and their response is, no locals want that. It's like, okay, but you're being short-sighted and you're sitting in traffic for 4 hours to go skiing, and what you're doing is not working, and this gondola would fix everything and it would fix it tomorrow. but you don't like it because you want to keep tourists out of the canyon or something. That's the group where the friction happens, and that's the group that's least willing to do anything to make it better. The operators, at least, even the ones that I've had issues with, at least they know. I will bring them on the podcast and I will say, all right, for example, Jiminy Peak, your season pass is $1,200. I think that's insane because that's more than an Icon pass, and you're a small New England ski area. And yes, you're a good operator, but how on earth do you justify that? And I flame them about it, but Tyler Fairbank and Brian Fairbank will say, well, we do it because we think it's the right thing. And we've been operating the ski area for 30 years, and this is our reasoning. And I appreciate that. And we don't have to agree. And Tyler and Brian know that. And I just had Tyler on this podcast not too long ago, and Brian's been on. And they know that I have a completely different opinion on that, but that I can think this and they can think that. And that doesn't mean that either of us has to be right or either of us has to be angry at the other person for having that point of view. It just means that we're part of the conversation. And the person who won't talk because I live in New York City and have the audacity to have an opinion about something happening in Utah is that next chasm that I need to figure out how to get across, because I can't figure out how to do it.
Yeah, if you could solve that problem, you'd probably be president of the whole country, much less not just Storm Skiing Journal. But yeah, there is, social media, it's not a very safe place right now. I think a lot of people love the idea of something happening, but struggle with the implementation. We're seeing a lot of these small resort towns like Jackson and used to just be Aspen and Jackson and Vail that were unlivable, right? Now, ski communities across the planet are becoming much more difficult to live in them the way you used to. And there is a lot of anger out there. There is a lot of discontent. I think I agree with you to a point that skiing hasn't had a very active press. It always amazes me, like, what Vail Resorts can get away with as a publicly traded company that most publicly traded companies in other spaces can't get away with. Now that has changed a little bit, right? There's been a lot of criticism there. There's been a lot of people talking about what's wrong with skiing. I said something yesterday that, I thought skiing was going through an identity crisis. Do you think that's the case?
Yes. And I think social media is a big part of that. And let me start there because social media plays an interesting part in the storm and the storm's growth. But I had to stop engaging with it, and I still use it every day. But I don't read any comments that anyone makes. At first, I just stopped responding. And then I just stopped reading, which might seem disingenuous for a writer. But what I figured out is that for me personally, it's an enormous energy suck that one negative comment can have the power of 100 positive ones. And that if I'm going to continue to seek out the true story of skiing, I can't get mired in the most negative elements of it. So that's my way of saying that social media is the backdrop for everything that's happening in skiing right now, as it's the backdrop for everything that's happening in modern life. So we need to understand that's there. If you this is an example I use all the time. Let's say that we just woke up from 2017, all right, or 2016, right? And that's not that long ago. Logan, my son, who was born in November 2016, so he's 8 years old. It's not that old. And if you go back to 2016, there was no Vail Resorts in the Northeast. Alterra Mountain Company didn't exist. The Icon Pass didn't exist. The Indy Pass didn't exist. If you wanted a multi-mountain pass in the Northeast, you had something called the Peak Pass. And that was Mount Snow and Hunter and all of the peak resorts that Vail ended up buying. Those are all now in the Epic Pass. And you had the Max Pass, which was sort of an antecedent to, well, it was a direct antecedent to the Icon Pass. So we had that and it was there, but it was a completely different world. And it all changed so fast. Vail bought Stowe in 2017, then they bought Okemo in 2018, and Mount Sunapee, then they bought Peak Resorts. Then Alterra Mountain Company comes out of nowhere, and then the Indy Pass comes in to kind of fill in the gaps around that. And Mountain Collective is part of the conversation too. But what it's added up to is taken together with the shock of COVID and the complete reorientation of life that happened around there. I didn't talk about that in relation to the storm, but if we wouldn't have gone to remote work, it would have been very hard for me to do both these jobs at once because I was able to do a lot at home, got a lot of work done when I wasn't commuting. I left the office in March 2020 and never went back. But you're talking about when I started the storm in 2019, I wanted to use a digital online audio recording platform to record the interviews. 8 out of 10 of these ski guys were like, whoa, bro, can we just use the phone? Like they couldn't do it, right? COVID took care of that in like 5 seconds because everyone just had to do this all of a sudden. So now everyone's comfortable with the digital recording. But that one example.
By the way, with digital recording, you're talking about using Zoom. I just want to point that out, right? Yeah. Like, okay, I just
not even as sophisticated as Zoom. Where I use this a Zencaster for years, which is not even video; it's just audio, and it's just you literally just click a link and you're connected. But they just couldn't handle it. But that was a little over 5 years ago, Eric. So we fast forward, and all of a sudden you look at as a whole how much the way that skiers access skiing and think about skiing, A, with a mega pass, B, with social media and these online communities and these mobs that can take hold, the whole framework around how we experience our winters. Also a part of this is weather tracking apps and all the different ways that you can chase where the best conditions are. It's all changed the way that people think about skiing, engage with skiing, interact with skiing. And we've sort of seen that first surge into this. It's almost that blind where you just adopt because it's there to adopt. Kind of like what we did with social media, where we all just started using it. And then we figured out, oh, wait, this is terrible for our brains and our souls and our bodies and our kids. And now we're starting to rethink, like, maybe we shouldn't be on a phone every minute of every day. Same thing's kind of happening with skiing, where we're charging in. These passes are too good to be true. We love them. The companies love them so much that they start charging $300 a day for skiing at some of the bigger resorts. And now we're kind of living with that world. And I don't know, some parts of it are sustainable. I don't know which parts, but some parts aren't. And the next 10 years or so for me is fascinating because what I've positioned myself to do is analyze it, right? So I'm just in the peanut gallery saying, okay, this is interesting. All these people that I'm talking to on a daily basis, they're the ones who have to figure out, what does skiing look like in this mega pass era? Is there a way through that does not compromise in all the ways that you're working every day to try to make sure that it doesn't? So yes, skiing's in an identity crisis because the world changed really quickly, and we're almost like a woolly mammoth that just stepped out of a iceberg, and we've been frozen for 5,000 years, and we're looking around like, all right, what is this world and what are we going to do with it? Hey, maybe today you're just hearing from me, but I know that a lot of you come to this podcast to hear from the best minds in skiing. But what if you want to find one of these great leaders to lead your own mountains team? Well, that's why I work with the folks at Profile Search International. They are the ski industry talent acquisition experts, and they are the only executive search and recruitment firm in the world that is 100% focused on the ski industry. Profile Search has used their intimate understanding of skiing and related industries and of available candidates worldwide to place hundreds of transformational leaders at the best and most progressive ski areas over the past 30 years. They have offices in the US and Canada, so Profile Search can find and negotiate with the right leaders for your team. You can reach out to them directly at profilesearch.com, or contact them by email or phone, or send me a note and I will connect you directly with this expert team. All right, back to Eric.
I think it's going to get more complex before it gets simpler. And there has been a lot of complexity made with the three major passes and who's on what and who moves and what does that mean when someone moves and how it changes the spending patterns. And we go from like making everything about pre-purchased revenue and locking people in for as much as possible. But people are pushing back on that too, right? They are more focused on ski conditions and where to go and where the stoke is, even though now they can go everywhere, right? We've basically given them all these choices, and now it's really challenging. And I don't think it's great for skiing. Obviously we all want to ski powder, right? But the way that you talk about skiing, right, is you're a guy in New York City and you've got 200 ski areas and options and those type of things. Like, it's not good for skiing if everyone just waits back for it to snow, right? And it's not good for skiing when the masses start storm chasing, in my opinion. And I think you talk a lot about, you don't talk about weather that much. Like you bring it up, but for me, it's 5% about what you write about. And there's 95% something other than just weather or the best ski day or whatever it might be. So talk to me a little bit about that. Talk to me, like, how do you compile up? How do you aggregate the totality of your podcast? But also, I think it's worth noting, not just the podcast, it's the email, it's the written communication. For me, I've probably only ever listened to one podcast in its entirety. Because I don't, when I drive, I don't like to listen to any music. I'll have an 8-hour drive and I just want to sit there in silence and think. So I don't listen to those, but I religiously read your written work. So how do you decide what makes the cut? How do you decide what makes up the meat of what you do from a content standpoint?
So to start with a kind of a sub point first, and that's to say what you did about weather, and then I'll bring it back to the bigger stuff. So weather is very ephemeral, right? And to me, it's very confusing when I look at the maps and in the charts, and there's smart people already doing that, right? So I didn't start the storm because there wasn't good sources for weather, because there are. So I didn't need to do that, and I didn't need to worry about that. What I always liked about skiing was the variety of it and the way you engage with the hill and what you're doing really when you go to someone's ski area. So when I learned to ski, it was in Michigan. There's all these family-owned ski areas. And a lot of them are on your pass, Nubs Knob and Crystal Mountain and Cabernet and Shanty Creek. And then you have the two Boyne Mountains, which, yes, they're part of a corporation, but they started as family mountains and it's still a family-run company. So they're super interesting places, and each one is unique, and each one is like, it's like a piece of art. Like someone said, we have this raw hill, and we're going to make a place for people to have fun. And we're going to do all these cool things to make it better than the hill down the road. One of the coolest, and the first hill I ever really fell in love with was Cabernet. And it is, I don't know if you've had a chance to go there, but it's so cool because it used to be this big sprawling ski area. It was like 2 miles wide. It had like a zillion rope toes, and it only had like 150 vertical feet. And in the 80s, the Meyer family, they started to dig out the bottom and move that dirt to the top. And so they created, in the middle of Michigan, this 485 vertical foot Twin Peaks above tree line skiing in Michigan. They created like this mini Alps in Cadillac, Michigan, which is the most improbable place in the world. And I was just so drawn to the place and so captivated by it and so interested in, why did they cut a trail here through the trees and leave these trees intact? And why did they build a jump here? And why did they cut these winding trails here and straight trails here? And I just love that experiential part of it. And I love the way that operators would build this little playground. Ski areas are like parks, really. It's like someone built this park for you to go experience. And as I started skiing around more and more, skiing in a place like Vermont and Colorado, and I would see how in Vermont at Okemo or Stratton, they would groom every run every night, and it drove me insane. I was like, why do you do that? Now, every run's the same, and it's so boring, and I hate it. And you go to Colorado and they would hardly groom anything. And I thought that was so cool. And I became very captivated by the way that those experiences were created. So everything that I do with the Storm is, how is someone building this experience for a lift served skier that is going to go there with their buddies and have a day that they're going to talk about for the rest of their lives? You know, I'm 47. I still have days that I skied with my buddies when I was 17, and we still talk about them. And that one jump that we hit, you know, before terrain parks were a thing, and jumps were bootleg, and we had to make it, and we just hit the same jump all day, all day, all day, 8 hours. And it was one of the best days ever. And we still talk about it. So how are the people who are creating these environments sculpting them in a way so that I will have the next day that I'll be talking about in 30 years? And that's the through line. And all the lift talk, the passes, the terrain, the traffic, all of that is about the experience and how all that comes together to give what you will or will not remember about a ski day for the rest of your life. This like transcendental thing that we all have.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's the nostalgia of what those feelings were like, or, you know, the golden age of skiing and what people remember and what they're seeking out, and, you know, why they run from one pass to another pass or do those things, right? It isn't, I agree with you. It isn't the lifts. It isn't necessarily the weather. It's the accumulation of all of it. And, you know, that kinesthetic feedback you get when you go down the hill, and, you know, the people that are around, and what the inside of the lodge smells like, and what hot cocoa tastes like, right? Like all those things accumulate to decide where people go and how we compete for their time and money. Let's talk about the spreadsheets, dude. Like a lot of colors. You know, you can blame me for this at IndyPass, but they just seem to get bigger and more complicated and more colors. And my mom always brings up the spreadsheets. That's like the number one thing, is just those things. So we talked about Jeremy Davis from NELSAP and the fact that he organized lost ski areas and made a way to look at them and do things. And you look at somebody like Peter Landsman from Lift Blog and the remarkable amount of work that he's done to go around and ride every lift and take photos. And as an operator, I love that thing now. I just go to Lift Blog and I see what the lifts are. And the questions you ask about ski areas and why did they do this and where they put that, I feel the same about lifts, where it's, wow, this lift is so different and weird. And yeah, there's either a single, double, triple, quad. I don't think there's a 5-pack in the world, a 6, an 8, a 10, right? But there's only 10 options, is my point. But they all do these remarkably different things. And Peter found a way to aggregate that and make that really, really cool. You've done that with passes to the point that no one else has done. Like nobody, I'll be very honest. There's times that I come to you or Doug comes to you to ask when this person came on the Indy Pass and what's going on, because we almost feel you keep better track of it than we do. So what's up there?
So, I said I created the Storm because I wanted to read it. I created those spreadsheets because I needed a reliable single source of truth. Because there's a lot of aggregators and there's a lot of folks who have put together a lot of resources about skiing. They're not always necessarily up to date. And not to say mine are up to date every minute, because I'm just like my life is not built to be able to do that, to be able to keep it up in real time, but they're up to date enough. And I kept having to Google things like list of ski areas in Colorado, vertical drop of Steamboat, skiable acreage at Sugar Bowl. Like I needed to just have it all as a list. I needed everything in one place. So I slowly, from all these different sources, sometimes the ski areas themselves, started to build this, and it's still a living list where every day I'm changing something. And I finally figured out how to make it so that when I change the stat on Monarch Mountain on the main list, it changes on the Colorado list and everywhere else, because no one ever told me about pivot tables and I'm an idiot. So I finally have it all sort of synced up with tabs. My wife doesn't like the colors. She thinks it needs to be more plain. I just like the visual cues. I'm not saying they're good, I'm just saying that they're information. That's all they're meant to be. And sometimes people want me to figure out a way to monetize that, or they ask if permission to use it. And I don't care. Like, it's just something I made for myself that I'm making available to everyone else if they want it. To me, it's a foundational document. It's almost like an open source code for skiing, where how many active skiers are there? Well, here's how many I think there are. And it's actually really hard to count that number. So the as a result, because there's so many things to track, the spreadsheet keeps growing into new tabs like active ski areas with chairlifts, active ski areas with only surface lifts, private ski areas with surface lifts, private ski areas with chairlifts. And so there's all these offshoots, and I finally kind of tied them together. It will never be done. It will never be perfect. It will never be probably what anyone else wants it to be, but it saves me so much time.
Well, you don't have to twist my arm to convince me that the data is a little bit messed up in skiing, and
Yeah.
it is pretty incredible when there is one remarkable source of truth, when there is an encyclopedia, or there is something in that manner that really points out where things are going. But let's talk about the style. Let's talk about the bro team kind of style. It's edgy, it's fun. I really enjoy reading it. I think there's a lot of people that find it too edgy sometimes. How do you it's a style I don't really read anywhere else. And it's not the way you talk either. Generally, like when you talk in person, you don't talk like that at all. Like if you read all of your stuff, and then if I formed an impression about meeting you after only reading your stuff, it'd be very different than actually meeting you and talking with you and talking to your wife and talking to your kid. And where does this come from? Where does this sort of this alter ego kind of jab kind of stuff happen?
There's one overarching philosophy behind this, and that's skiing is fun. Reading about it should be too.
Hmm.
And I know, having been an English major and just someone who read a lot and going to journalism school, I've read a lot, and I know what I like to read, and I know what I have to get through to read. And I wanted to create something that people wanted to read, that they would have fun reading, that would give them little rewards and make them laugh. One of my biggest inspirations is this site called MGoBlog, and it's about University of Michigan sports. And I really like Michigan football. But if I'm being really honest, I don't really understand football that well. Like, I get it, I get the basic rules. But what I like about football is less the football than the experience of football. And that's waking up at 6, tailgating on the golf course with my friends, going into a stadium with 110,000 people, having the fighter jets fly over, being part of the crowd, being outside. These are the things that attracted me to football. And that's why I'm a Michigan football season ticket holder, even though I live in New York City. And I have 8 season tickets, and I take my family and all my friends, and I just love it. But MGoBlog, the guy who founded it, this guy Brian Cook, he's just this fantastic writer, and he writes with this just such a sense of style and humor and insight, and he really gets football, and he writes and he can go to that level and break down the plays and everything. And he has a bunch of other writers that do those things, but I never read that stuff because I don't understand it. I don't really care. What he's able to do is capture that sensation of what it's like to be a football team and to care about a team and to travel for a team and have your whole life revolve around the football season, even though there's only 12 games a year. And he puts this into really concise posts that are funny and entertaining. And I wanted to do that for skiing. I wanted to make the MGoBlog for skiing. And there's a lot of influences in there, and I've written about this in the past, but I knew that if I wanted to write about skiing, yes, I had to find a niche and I had to find something nobody else was writing about. But it had to be engaging, because when it comes to the transactional part of this, and if I want to build a business out of it, people are going to pay for what makes them feel good. That's why we buy ski passes, right? Because we know that if we buy an Indy pass, we're going to go to Jay Peak. We know Jay Peak makes us happy because Jay Peak is great. So if I'm asking people to invest in this, it needs to be something they feel good about. And I feel like a lot of ski influencer bros on social media have built their brand around making people feel bad about skiing. And this is what sucks about skiing. And this is why I hate skiing. And this is why skiing is ruined. And this is why Vail is ruining skiing. And this is why everything's too expensive. And if anyone disagrees with me, I'm gonna, shame them and cancel them. That approach doesn't make anyone feel good. It drove me, for the most part, off social media. And no one's going to pay for a product that makes them feel bad, especially when your target is recreational skiers who like to travel around. And if my message is, well, this is serious because, lift tickets are $300 and people can't afford to live in ski towns and all these things, and I lecture at them and say, essentially, you're ruining skiing, no one's going to pay for that. No one's going to buy that. No one's going to read that. People want to feel good. And there's a way to be critical of things and to point out what's wrong with things and to acknowledge the problems with skiing without being a D-bag and without being a sanctimonious tool, and with instead just having fun with it and being fun and trying to be funny. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to create something that people, when it pops into their inbox, they want to spend 5 minutes with it. Because I just spent 15 hours with it. Because every time you get an email from me, and yes, I need to make them more concise, but that's 15 or 20 hours of work. And I know it's going to take you 5 or 7 minutes to read it. But that's how long it takes to create something that is snappy and that people want to engage with and sit with. So that's the goal, and that's what I'm trying to do every single time. And sometimes I have to write just a straight story, but I try not to as much as I possibly can.
Yeah, I think there's, at some point you're going to have to build a spreadsheet to compile some of the one-liners, right? There's just a lot of them, and I think they're really good. But one that kind of pops into my head is, I think you had written about how Burke had joined the Indy Pass a little bit here just ago, and obviously, there was the big story about the receivership and everything that needed to get done, and the fact we're year 8 or something now, and these whole type of things. And the way you described it about basically since the town was founded in 1872, Burke has been in receivership, and there's been an industrial revolution since then, and those type of things like that. That gets the point across really well, right? And I think that solves the problem for people. You don't have to go out there and call out the receiver by name and drag them through the mud and go here. It's just like, no, like I can tell a joke and make the point almost stronger and make you read more often and be more engaged. And I think that's what you do very well. At IndyPass, we call it the Winchester style. And I think maybe you're going to need like a retail item or something that says that.
Oh, wow.
The other idea I had too is, you said we don't mind if people use your spreadsheets. I think we're going to do IndyPass merch, where the back of the annual t-shirt is the spreadsheet provided by the Storm Skiing Journal of that year's roster. And then we'll know it's right.
Love it. You're going to need some small font there, man.
We are. We're going to need some big spreadsheets and small font. Yeah, it's very interesting around the style. And I think that's, nobody writes like you in skiing, for sure, whether it's because of the content or the delivery. And I don't find many people that write like you. And when I think about publications and things that I read a lot, like I the closest thing that I can find like that parallels to what you do, and again, it's a very British toned down version of it, but you look at The Economist and you look at how The Economist is written, and how they maintain that style across an entire magazine and a whole bunch of different humans. So I think you're onto something, and it's certainly a lot more fun than reading The Economist. Um,
Mission accomplished.
mission accomplished. What else do you want to talk about? I've fairly exhausted my list. Other than I think really one more thing sort of around like the reader trusting you, and I think
Mhm.
that's become really challenging today with journalism in general and the source of people's news, right? I think we all know what's working and what isn't working, but where we get our information bias from, where we get our news from, the stations that we listen to, the personalities that we listen to, we're very either like trust what that person says or don't trust what that person says, right? And how do you get people? How do you continue to get people to trust, what you say?
It this is where I kind of to go back to when I decided to take this paid. I knew that before I could turn this into a business, I had to build an audience. And to build an audience, I had to have something to say. And if I have that audience seeking out something that I'm saying, it has to be real. It has to be anchored in the truth. So that was the starting point. And that's still the starting point every day is, okay, what are the facts? What's happening? And then what are people saying about it? And then what do I think about it, right? Because there is a layer of opinion folded into the storm. It's a little bit of what we in college called creative nonfiction, where it's you're telling the real life story, but you're trying to do it in an engaging way. And the the spreadsheet is part of that, right? It's having something to point back to. The 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 relationships that I've built with almost every ski area operator in the country are a big part of that. Where, for example, yesterday I saw Perfect North took over operations at Swiss Valley, this little ski area in Michigan. So I immediately texted Jonathan Davis, the GM at Perfect North, said, "Oh, this is great. I want to write a story about it." So whatever news I deliver about that is going to be told from this larger point of view of understanding the ski industry and having that context. The smaller perspective of the Perfect family being these great operators and why they decided to expand into Michigan after buying Timberline in West Virginia, then they can connect me with the folks at Swiss Valley. And what my job is to take all of these facts. Perfect North is taking over operations at Swiss Valley after they bought Timberline. And that exists in this larger world where Swiss Valley is part of the Indy Pass. Perfect North is not. What does that mean for the pass? Maybe you already know. I don't know. But it's also this greater competitive landscape. We also have climate change happening. And look at this. One of the best operators in the country is in southern Indiana, where they figured out how to run a ski area with 220 snow guns they can turn on at once. And they're saying, you know what? Yes, climate change, but we're dealing with it. So all that's context, right? All that's happening, all those are facts. And my job is to synthesize all those, bring them together, get as close to the source as I can without being deferential, but knowing I respect their opinion and that I want to know why they did something. And then filtering all that through this more meta ski landscape and saying, okay, this is what it means that Perfect North took over operations at Swiss Valley, Michigan in 2025 in this megapass landscape with a changing climate in, a deindustrializing US that needs these small ski centers and is challenged to operate them. So that's how I'm trying to do that, is to take all these inputs and put them together into, and to go back to the writing style, a hopefully engaging to read report that puts all those things together. That builds trust.
And I think it does. I think it does. And being at 200 podcasts and doing that and having, a career change during those first 200 and doing the things for skiing that you have are really important. And I think whether it's independent skiing or corporate skiing or any type of skiing, I think it's really important that we have good journalism and that people read that journalism and that they trust where it's from. And it's done with purpose. And so, I think it's a huge congratulations to get to 200, and I'm really glad to have done this with you. And I look forward to doing the 400. That's
400.
400. That's when I'll be back again.
Okay.
So,
All right. Wait, why not 300? You want to keep the cadence?
yeah, let's just keep the cadence.
Every
I mean, you're
200?
going to be at 400 anyway in a couple weeks, so it'll be fine.
Couple of weeks. You know
Um,
what? I could be there in 4 years. How's 2029 sound to you?
Sounds great.
Maybe 2030.
I think that's good. Indy Pass, we'll be at 7,000 resorts, and you could be at 400 podcasts.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff. All right. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, dude.
Thanks so much for that, Eric. What a cool idea, and I'm so glad we made it happen. I will see you for number 399, hopefully sometime around late 2029 or early 2030. Thank you all so much for listening. Back to the regular format for episode 201 and beyond. I've already got some really good conversations recorded with the leaders of Jiminy Peak, Massachusetts, and Silver Mountain, Idaho. And we have the leaders of Powder Mountain, Utah, Hunter Mountain, New York, Mountain Hood Meadows, Oregon, Arapahoe Basin, Colorado, and many, many more scheduled for the coming months. Please remember to follow The Storm on YouTube, X, and Instagram at Storm Ski Journal. And most important, please subscribe to the Storm Skiing newsletter at stormskiing.com. The podcast is just a small part of this whole operation, and I am exploring the world of lift serve skiing all year long. Until next time, stay well, stay safe. I'm Stuart Winchester, and I'll talk to you again very soon.
The Storm Skiing Podcast is a Quicksilver Films production.